Listen closely. Can you hear it? That faint hum, the endless sigh of a world forgotten. Here, in the hollowed-out skeleton of what was once a grand city, the silence is thick, broken only by the whispers of dust and the slow, heavy breathing of things that shouldn't exist. My name is Eris. They call me the sleepy scientist. But sleep is a luxury I haven't known in decades. My work is to catalog the impossible, to chronicle the silent echoes of our greatest mistake. The creatures I study aren't beasts resurrected from ancient ice, nor are they fictions sprung from a child's wild imagination. They are ours, our strange, beautiful, horrifying legacy. The last living specters of an age we refuse to remember, moving through the gray twilight like ancient, slumbering giants. They are, in their own tragic way, the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived. The dawn didn't break with a fanfare of light in Neo-Richmond. It seeped, a slow, grudging bleed of gray into the perpetual twilight that clung to the city like a shroud. Eris awoke not to an alarm, but to the subtle shift in the quality of the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light that pierced her makeshift dwelling. Her bed, a cot cobbled from salvaged pipe and a forgotten mattress, offered little comfort, but it was hers, a small anchor in the vast, adrift sea of silence. She moved with the economy of someone who had long since shed all superfluous motion. Her hands, nimble despite their age-worn texture, reached for the worn metal mug beside her cot. A self-heating coil, ancient technology barely humming, warmed the filtered condensate to a lukewarm state. The taste was always the same, flat, mineral-tinged, a ghost of what water once was. She drank slowly, her gaze drifting to the window. Neo-Richmond lay outside, a skeletal monument to hubris. Once it had glittered, a jewel along the Atlantic seaboard, a city of towering ambition and cutting-edge design. Now, its celebrated sky bridges sagged like broken spines. Its holographic billboards flickered with phantom advertisements of long-defunct corporations, their promises of a better future ironic echoes in the wind. Dust, fine and omnipresent, layered every surface, softening the harsh lines of decay, painting the city in shades of ochre and rust. It was the only constant, the silent witness to every rise and fall. Eris pulled on her practical gray fatigues, the fabric thick enough to withstand the abrasive dust and the occasional brush against crumbling rebar. Her boots were heavy, designed for traversing uneven terrain. She clipped her datapad to her belt, ensuring the charge was full. It was her constant companion, her portal to the past, and her record of the present. On its screen, the last entry glowed faintly. Egg Day, 11387. Subject 7.4. 2. Subterranean. Activity nominal. Vocalization pattern minor. Further observation required. The silence was the first thing to greet her as she stepped out of her sanctuary. It wasn't an empty silence, but a profound, almost sentient hush, thick with memory and the lingering specters of noise. No chirping birds, no distant traffic, no human chatter. Only the whisper of the wind through broken windows, the creak of stressed metal, and the soft, almost imperceptible dithrum beneath her feet. It was the city breathing, a mechanical sigh that had become as much a part of her world as her own pulse. Her morning patrol began. She navigated the narrow passages she had painstakingly cleared, winding through what were once bustling market districts. She passed the husks of high-end boutiques, their shattered display windows revealing mannequins frozen in poses of forgotten elegance, coated in layers of grit. The air, though still, tasted of ozone and dried concrete, a scent that had long replaced the salt tang of the ocean that lay miles beyond the city's choked perimeter. Iris carried a lightweight, multi-spectrum scanner, sweeping it methodically across walls and debris. The device hummed softly, a counterpoint to the city's deeper vibration. She wasn't looking for anomalies, not precisely. She was looking for eye patterns. The subtle discolorations on a crumbling facade, the unusual erosion of a support beam, the peculiar striations on a segment of pavement. These were the signatures, the faint trails left by the things that lurked in the city's heart. She paused at a once grand plaza, now a wilderness of cracked pavers and tenacious weeds that had punched through the concrete. In the center, a statue of a forgotten civic leader, once polished bronze, now corroded green, stood sentinel over nothing. Her scanner chirped, a low, melodic tone. She lowered it, her gaze following the holographic overlay that shimmered into existence. A faint, residual energy signature. Not human, not animal in any traditional sense. It was the ghost of a passage, a fleeting presence. Another one, she murmured, her voice a fragile sound in the immensity. Moving through the sub-level conduits again. She knelt, her gloved fingers brushing away dust from a peculiar indentation in the cracked pavement. It wasn't a footprint, not with claws or toes. It was a broad, shallow depression, as if something impossibly heavy and smooth had settled here, then slowly shifted. The edges were clean, almost too perfect for natural erosion. She took a photo with her datapad, logging the coordinates, time, and an initial hypothesis. A subject, 7422. Or a new variant. Question hung unanswered, swallowed by the silence. The loneliness was a constant companion, a presence as real as the dust itself. It wasn't a sudden pang of longing, but a deep, pervasive ache woven into the fabric of her every waking moment. She spoke to herself sometimes, or to the datapad, her thoughts externalized in the void. Who else was there to hear? The last transmission from the distant outposts had faded decades ago, swallowed by the ever-increasing atmospheric interference. She was the final archivist, the solitary chronicler of humanity's strange, self-made twilight. Her work was meticulous, a ritual against the encroaching chaos. Each observation, however minute, was catalogued, cross-referenced, analyzed. She charted their movements, their feeding patterns, though what they consumed was still largely a mystery, their growth rates, their strange resonant vocalizations that were more felt than heard. They were evolved, not in the natural patient way of millennia, but in the rapid, panicked crucible of human interference. Our attempt to control the uncontrolled, to bend biology to our will, had yielded not tools, but these echoes, these magnificent, horrifying mistakes. By midday, the sun, a pale, anemic disk behind the perpetual haze, cast long, indistinct shadows. The heat began to build, a dry, oppressive warmth that seeped into her bones. Eris found respite in the shade of a half-collapsed atrium, its once transparent dome now opaque with grime and structural fatigue. She ate her meager ration, a nutrient bar, dense and flavorless, while reviewing the morning's scans. She zoomed in on the energy signature. It was faint, yes, but undeniably virile. A deep, low-frequency hum, just at the edge of human perception, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was the rhythm of something vast, something moving with an almost geological slowness. Not the frantic energy of living creatures as she remembered them from childhood holos, but the deliberate, weighty motion of ancient, slumbering giants. Sometimes she would sit and just listen, Really listen. Beyond the wind and the creaking, past the drone of her own equipment, there was a deeper hum. It resonated through the very foundations of the city, through the concrete and steel, into the earth itself. It was the song of the city's new inhabitants, the last living specters of an age we refuse to remember. Their presence was a constant, almost comforting pressure against the overwhelming emptiness, a strange, beautiful, horrifying legacy. As the day began its slow fade into the gray twilight, Aris started her trek back to her dwelling. The light softened further, painting the ruins in hues of bruised plum and sepia. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint earthy scent that hadn't been there in the morning. She knew what it meant. The creatures were stirring. They were nocturnal, for the most part, their immense, slow metabolisms tuned to the cool of the night. She passed a section of the old financial district, where the taller towers seemed to lean together, whispering secrets. Here, the hum was stronger, the vibration underfoot more pronounced. She felt a prickle of something akin to awe, mixed with the familiar melancholy. They were magnificent in their own tragic way. They were the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived, and she, the sleepy scientist, was their only chronicler, silently watching, silently recording, as the world moved on without a single glance back. Back in her sanctuary, as the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky, Aris uploaded her day's findings. The screen glowed, a small beacon in the deepening gloom. She could hear the city now, truly hear it. The deep guttural thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, the occasional grinding sound from somewhere far below, the shift of immense weight. She was safe, for now, protected by her knowledge of their patterns, her understanding of their slow, deliberate lives. She brewed another mug of water, the warmth a small comfort. Sleep, she knew, would be a long time coming. The whispers of dust would be joined tonight by the slow, heavy breathing of things that shouldn't exist, and Aris, the sleepy scientist, would listen, as she always did. The ascent was a slow, deliberate surrender to gravity's weary pull. My gear, a motley collection of salvaged ropes, modified ascenders, and a harness that hummed with a low, barely perceptible current of stored energy, groaned in protest with every meter gained. These weren't the smooth, vertical climbs of ancient adventurers. No, these were the broken teeth of a forgotten world, jagged spires of rebar and concrete that scraped against the bruised sky, each fractured pane of glass, a silent scream. Below, the city sprawled like a forgotten, petrified organism, its arteries choked with dust, its once vibrant heart now a cavern of echoes. Up here, however, in the thin metallic air of the upper echelons, the silence was different. It wasn't empty, but full, saturated with the weight of time, with the ghostly hum of forgotten ambition. They were forbidden, these heights. Not by any living law, for living law had long since crumbled with the structures it once sought to govern. Forbidden by instinct, by the chilling whispers of the wind that carried not just dust, but the pulverized memories of those who had once reached for the stars from these very ledges. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a transient ghost against the backdrop of eternal decay. Each handhold was a gamble, each foot placement a prayer. The higher I climbed, the more the air itself seemed to vibrate, a low, resonant frequency that settled in my bones. It was the last gasp of dormant power grids, the sympathetic hum of vast empty server farms that once processed the dreams and dreads of millions, now just metallic husks resonating with the very emptiness of existence. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, the prelude to what I had come to see. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the growing ache in my muscles and the ever-shifting tapestry of the twilight sky. When I finally reached the planned observation platform, a precarious, wind-scoured ledge on what was once the 73rd floor of the old Horizon Tower, the world tilted. The city below was a mosaic of shadows and muted grays, the distant, faint pinpricks of light from the lower dwelling scavengers and bioluminescent flora, utterly dwarfed by the sheer, unyielding scale of the collapse. Above me, the skeletal frameworks of higher floors clawed upwards, filigree against the deepening cobalt. And then, I saw it. It wasn't a sudden, startling revelation, but a slow, graceful unfolding, like a secret whispered across the vastness. First, a flicker, a distant, pearlescent glow, barely distinguishable from the dying light of the sun on the western horizon. Then, a shape began to coalesce, vast and impossibly fluid, drifting with a dreamlike languor between the broken bones of the skyscraper canopy. My breath hitched. It was a skymanta. Colossal. The word felt small, inadequate. It was easily the size of a dozen of the old city buses, its immense flat body rippling with an ethereal, inner light that pulsed like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. It moved with a profound, almost sorrowful grace, not flying in any conventional sense, but rather gliding. Imagine a manta ray, vast and silent, not in the ocean's depths, but suspended in the thinned upper atmosphere, navigating the currents and eddies between the broken towers as if they were coral reefs. Its immense wing-like pectoral fins, edged with what looked like translucent membranes, caught the light and shimmered with an internal bioluminescent network of veins, a cool phosphorescent blue that intensified and receded in intricate pattern. I pressed myself against the cold concrete, my ancient, salvaged binoculars trembling in my hands, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming majesty of it. The skymanta was a ghost made flesh, a creature born of the wreckage, yet utterly alien to it. Its form was unmistakably organic, yet its very existence defied the laws of the pre-collapse world. Its head, if you could call it that, was a broad, flattened expanse, punctuated by two large, dark orbs, eyes, perhaps, or sensory organs that seemed to absorb the twilight rather than reflect it. Beneath its body, I could faintly discern what looked like filter-feeding structures, delicate, feathery tendrils that drifted in the air currents, seemingly sifting the very atmosphere for sustenance. Dust, perhaps? Ionized particles? The forgotten energy I had felt vibrating in the structures? It made no sound that I could detect, no roar or cry, only the immense silent displacement of air as it moved. The only audible accompaniment was the mournful sigh of the wind through the rebar, and the frantic thump of my own heart against my ribs. Its bioluminescence wasn't just decorative, it was functional, I was certain. I watched as the blue light rippled across its vast form, highlighting intricate, almost geometric patterns, like constellations mapping themselves across a living sky. Perhaps it was communication, a silent language spoken between these impossible giants, or a means of subtly manipulating air currents, creating miniature updrafts that allowed its immense bulk to remain aloft with such effortless grace. My quiet observation continued for what felt like an eternity. The skymanta circled a particularly tall, broken spire, its blue light momentarily illuminating the jagged edges of shattered glass and exposed concrete, painting them in an ethereal glow. It moved so slowly, so deliberately, as if in a perpetual state of meditation. There was a profound, almost pathetic beauty to it. Beauty, in its impossible elegance, its adaptation to a world it should never have inhabited. Pathetic in its very essence, a testament to a grand, almost blasphemous ambition and the equally grand, crushing failure that had birthed it. Yue did this, I thought, the whisper barely forming in my mind. Why did this? That's all. These colossal structures, these daring reachings for the sky, were once monuments to our boundless ego, our belief that we could tame nature, outwit gravity, and build our own heavens. We dreamed of a world where our ingenuity knew no limits, where progress was an unstoppable, linear march upwards. We poured our collective will, our resources, our very essence into these towers, attempting to scrape the heavens, to assert our dominion. And then we broke it. We broke the sky, the earth, ourselves. And in the shattered remains this creature, a living echo, a monstrously beautiful byproduct. It wasn't a resurrection of ancient beasts, nor an alien invader. It was yours, a distorted reflection of our hubris, a biological ghost of our highest aspirations and lowest failures. The sky manta, gliding through the skeletal remains of our grandest designs, was proof that life, in its infinite, terrifying adaptability, finds a way, even if that way is a silent, blue-lit lament. It was a creature of the air, yes, but born from the earth's wounds, from the toxic stew of our self-destruction. Its filter-feeding tendrils, gently sifting the dusty air, were not for plankton, but for the detritus of our broken world. It was subsisting on our waste, metabolizing the very essence of our collapse into its strange, radiant life. What did it thinking of the world it inhabited? Did it even think? Or was it simply an instinctual engine, a biological processing unit, turning our ruin into its own bizarre existence? The sadness was a heavy physical weight in my chest. Not a sharp, aching grief, but a dull, pervasive melancholy, like the endless sigh of a world forgotten. The sky manta was an elegy made manifest, a living poem of regret. It moved through the twilight like an ancient, slumbering giant, unaware perhaps of the profound tragedy it embodied. Or perhaps, in its slow, silent glide, it was aware, and its bioluminescent pulses were not just a means of survival, but a slow, quiet weeping. I watched until the last vestiges of its blue glow melted into the deepening indigo of the night sky, swallowed by the sheer immensity of the desolation. The air, though still humming with its forgotten energy, felt emptier, colder. My mission was to catalog the impossible, to chronicle these silent echoes. But sometimes, in the face of such bizarre, pathetic beauty, the scientist in me receded, leaving only the heartbroken human, whispering into the void, a solitary witness to the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived. And they were, in every tragic sense, ours. My fingers, gnarled and slow, traced the chill of a forgotten console. Dust motes, like tiny, lost stars, danced in the anemic glow of my screen. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the weight of uncounted years and unspoken sorrow. Here, in this makeshift sanctuary carved from a crumbling library, the digital echoes of a vibrant, terrifying past flickered before me. I call them data logs, but they are more than that. They are whispers from ghosts, fragments of a grand, desperate dream, mingled with the slow dissolution of my own memories. Sometimes, I can barely tell which is which. The Great Genesis Project. Even the name hums with a faint, almost unbearable optimism. It was born not of ambition, but of sheer, unadulterated terror. The world outside, the one that once teemed with life, had become a skeletal thing, scoured clean by humanity's relentless consumption. The skies choked, the oceans acidified, the very soil turned to ash. We had, in our boundless ingenuity, engineered our own extinction. Panic, slow and creeping at first, then a roaring wildfire, drove us to the brink. We clawed at every solution, every wild theory. And then, a new whisper started. A plan. Not to restore what was lost, for that was beyond us, but to build anew. To fabricate life capable of surviving in the ruin we had wrought. The idea was to create massive, biological anchors, creatures designed not by millennia of slow evolution, but by algorithms and genetic splicing. Beings that could scrub the air, detoxify the water, remineralize the land. They called it Operation Second Eden. We called it, in our desperate, hopeful folly, the Great Genesis Project. I remember the initial fever, the gleaming labs, the bright-eyed scientists, their faces alight with a messianic zeal. We spoke of bioremediation giants, of environmental architects, of engineered symbionts. The public, weary and desperate, embraced the concept. Propaganda posters, still clinging to some rusted street signs outside, showed smiling, futuristic families gazing at towering, benevolent bioforms. We believed we were writing a new chapter, a testament to our ability to correct our mistakes, to pull ourselves back from the precipice. We thought we were building saviors. They weren't dinosaurs, not truly. Not in the fossilized ancient sense. Their lineage was a sterile string of code, their genesis a vat of nutrient-rich sludge and a spark of electric current. Yet the moniker stuck, whispered first in awe, then in fear, and finally in a kind of mournful resignation. The term weirdest dinosaurs captured something essential, something almost primal about them. Their scale, for one. We had conceived them grand, but they grew beyond our wildest projections, driven by the very genetic mandates we had instilled. There were the ether weavers, colossal organisms designed to filter atmospheric toxins, whose vast translucent bodies drifted through the upper atmosphere like slow motion, living zeppelins, blotting out the sun in a way that mimicked the ancient pterosaurs. Their colossal, intricate internal organs pulsed with a soft cyan light, a silent, almost reverent hum of their life-giving work. Then there were the geolumbars, creatures of immense terrestrial bulk, designed to break down and sequester heavy metals in the soil. They moved like living mountains, their multi-jointed limbs carving canyons in the barren earth as they slowly, endlessly processed the poisoned land. Their hides were like shifting shale, embedded with crystalline structures that glinted dully in the perpetual twilight, giving them an uncanny resemblance to the armored titans of the Mesozoic. One, I remember, was so vast it was mistaken for a new, inexplicable landmass before its slow, rhythmic breathing gave it away. It felt like standing before a brachiosaurus, but a brachiosaurus that hummed with a synthetic, mournful song. Their forms were often alien, truly. They didn't fit into any existing taxonomy. Some possessed bioluminescent internal organs, shining like stained glass cathedrals within their colossal frames. Others had limbs that branched and rebranched, or sensory arrays that resembled crystalline antennae, vibrating with unheard frequencies. We had thrown off the shackles of natural evolution, allowing our algorithms to explore impossible biological configuration. The result was often unsettling, a stark reminder that nature, in its infinite wisdom, had certain aesthetic and functional constraints we had brazenly ignored. They were beautiful, yes, in a stark, terrifying way, like impossible sculptures carved from living flesh. But their beauty was a cold, engineered thing, devoid of the messy, familiar warmth of true life. And then there was the cruel irony. They were evolutionary dead ends, designed for specific tasks, for immediate, desperate remediation. They lacked the fundamental resilience of truly evolved life. They were magnificent machines, but machines nonetheless. Many were sterile, or reproduced in highly controlled, artificial environments. They couldn't adapt, couldn't spontaneously evolve beyond their initial programming. They were perfect for that moment, for that specific crisis, but utterly fragile in the long run. They were magnificent, tragic monuments to a singular, short-sighted purpose, marching towards their inevitable decline even as they performed their programmed duties. Like the true dinosaurs, they were immense, awe-inspiring, and ultimately doomed. The initial optimism, so blindingly bright, began to fray at the edges, then unravel entirely. The variables, oh, the variables. They always laughed at us, didn't they? We had accounted for so much, but not for the unpredictable ballet of an already dying ecosystem. The aether weavers meant to purify the air, inadvertently created new, heavy air currents, disrupting residual weather patterns. The geolumbars, though diligently detoxifying the soil, consumed trace minerals vital to the last hardy remnants of natural flora. Their sheer scale, once a celebrated feature, became a problem. They occupied immense territories, often inadvertently crushing the last, struggling pockets of natural wildlife. And then there were the behavioral anomalies. We had programmed them for placid functionality, but some developed unforeseen territorial instincts, or strange mournful calls that echoed across the desolate plains, unnerving anyone who heard them. Their complex, engineered biologies proved more volatile than we'd anticipated, leading to unexpected mutations, runaway growth, or sudden, inexplicable shutdowns. The sheer energy and resources required to maintain them, to monitor their health, to manage their vast needs, became an unsustainable drain on a world already stripped bare. The whispers began again, but this time they were not of hope, but of fear. Frankenstein's folly, the media, ever fickle, crowed. Monsters of our own making. Funding dried up. Projects were abandoned midstream. The gleaming labs, once hives of fervent activity, became silent tombs, their screens dark, their vats cold. The world turned its back. It was too expensive, too dangerous, too ugly a reminder of our hubris and our failure. The creatures, these gentle, tragic giants, were simply left to drift in the poisoned skies, to slowly traverse the barren lands, to hum their strange mechanical songs into the thickening silence. They were not beasts to be hated, nor were they creations to be cherished. They were simply abandoned, monuments to a desperation that had soured into regret. And here I am, sifting through the dust of their forgotten history, watching them move like ancient, slumbering giants through the gray twilight. They are the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived. And they are ours. Our strange, beautiful, horrifying legacy. And I, the sleepy scientist, am their last chronicler, whispering their story into the vast, indifferent silence. The city exhales, a slow, crumbling breath that echoes through the fractured concrete arteries and along the skeletal steel bones. I felt it before I saw it, before the first tremor, before the insidious sigh of settling earth became a constant lullaby. A new presence, a deeper pulse, had begun to beat beneath our feet. This one was different from the skittering, arboreal things that clung to the upper spires or the luminous, silent drifters of the flooded avenues. This one was of the earth, born from its depths and returning to reshape it, inch by agonizing inch. They call it the ground crawler, a name I'd whispered into my recorder on my initial encounter, a placeholder for something vast and ancient, yet terrifyingly new. My journey to its domain began in the fractured subway tunnels, places where the last vestiges of human transit had stalled, leaving rust-red ghosts of trains swallowed by earth and time. The air here was heavy with the scent of damp soil, ozone, and something else, a faint mineral tang that always preceded its coming. Weeks blurred into a slow, patient vigil. I set up my makeshift camp in a collapsed station, its arched ceiling now a gaping maw to the surface, letting in a single pale shaft of light that moved with the sun like a dying clock hand. My equipment was minimal: acoustic sensors, seismic dampeners, a long-range thermal imager, and my ever-present journal, its pages filled with more questions than answers. Sleep was a restless dance with the tremors, a light, disturbed drift punctuated by the deep guttural thrumming that resonated through the bedrock. The ground crawler. Its sheer mass was difficult to comprehend. It wasn't merely large, it was geological. Imagine a slow-motion avalanche, given sentience and wrapped in layers of petrified earth, mineral deposits, and what appeared to be fused rebar, a bizarre living amalgam of rock and our forgotten infrastructure. Its armor wasn't external plating, but an integral part of its being, a carapace forged from the very rubble it consumed and processed, hardening into an almost impenetrable shell. I first caught a glimpse of it through a fissure opened by one of its subterranean passages, a cavernous maw, still steaming from the friction of its passage. The air trembled, and a low, resonant growl, more felt than heard, vibrated in my chest. Then, a section of the tunnel wall seemed to bulge inward, shimmering faintly. It wasn't coming through the wall. It was the wall, or rather, it was moving with such incredible power that the earth itself yielded and flowed around its passage. When it finally emerged into a larger, collapsed maintenance chamber, it was less like a beast and more like a continent slowly shifting. Its body was a vast, segmented mass, perhaps 60 feet in length, rippling with the effort of movement. No discernible head, no clear limbs, just a relentless, undulating progression. What I initially thought were eyes were deep, bioluminescent fissures that pulsed with a faint internal light, like molten veins within obsidian. These eyes swept across the chamber, not with sight, I suspected, but with some other, more profound form of perception, reading the pressure, the density, the very memory of the earth. Its destructive power was not malicious, not even deliberate. It was simply a consequence of its existence. Every subtle shift in the city's foundations, every new crack appearing in a distant skyscraper, every shudder felt kilometers away, was a testament to the ground crawler's slow, unceasing journey. It didn't destroy. It rearranged. It consumed the concrete, the twisted metal, the forgotten utilities, and incorporated them, processed them, spat them out elsewhere in new calcified formations that hardened like forgotten reefs. The city, in its silent, mournful way, was being digested and reborn, not by us, but by our most unexpected heir. My observations, stretched over what felt like an eternity of hushed moments, began to reveal patterns, rituals. The ground crawler wasn't just tunneling randomly. Its movements were guided by an innate, almost spiritual compass. It sought out specific nodes in the city's forgotten grid, junctions where ancient power lines converged, or deep foundations of buildings that once anchored entire blocks. It would linger in these spaces for days, sometimes weeks, its bioluminescent fissures dimming to a soft glow, its movement reduced to an almost imperceptible tremor. During these periods of stillness, the low thrumming intensified, becoming a complex, rhythmic pulse. It was as if the creature was singing to the earth, or perhaps listening to it. I recorded the frequencies, charted the vibrations. The patterns were intricate, almost mathematical, yet infused with an ancient, primal quality. It wasn't communication in our sense, but a kind of biogeological symbiosis. It was processing information, perhaps even imprinting itself upon the city's substrata, weaving its own presence into the very fabric of our ruins. Its rituals often involved the generation of massive crystalline structures within these subterranean nodes. I watched, hidden in the shadows, as the ground crawler would extrude a thick, viscous substance from its segments, which would then slowly harden, growing into intricate, almost beautiful formations. They looked like giant, calcified coral, pulsing with the same faint light as its fissures. Were these nests? Organs? Markers? I leaned towards something more profound. Perhaps these were its memories, its records, a slow, deliberate carving of its own history into the bones of our world. Each crystal formation was a chapter, a stanza in its silent, geological epic. The discovery of its vulnerability came not through weakness, but through understanding its purpose. For all its armored might, its relentless reshaping, the ground crawler was not self-sufficient. Its entire existence was predicated on the consumption and processing of our urban detritus. This was not merely sustenance, it was its very mode of being. One cold, desolate night, after weeks of observing a particularly elaborate crystal growth, I noticed a subtle shift. The creature, usually so indifferent to its immediate surroundings, seemed to hesitate. The thrumming faltered, the light within its fissures dimmed considerably. It was withdrawing a section of its massive body from an ancient water pipe, a pipe that, unbeknownst to me, had been slowly filling with a peculiar runoff from the upper levels, a residue of a forgotten industrial compound that seeped into the city's veins. The ground crawler recoiled, not in pain, but in what appeared to be discomfort. A tremor, almost like a shudder, passed through its vast form. The crystal structure it had been building began to fragment, tiny slivers flaking off, the faint glow dying. It was not death, but a profound unease, a disruption of its inherent rhythm. Its vulnerability, I realized with a chilling clarity, was not a chink in its armor, but in its very diet. Its complex biological processes, optimized for the consumption and repurposing of our specific materials. Concrete, steel, plastics, even the residual energies trapped within old wiring, were exquisitely specialized. It thrived on our waste, on the remnants of our destructive ingenuity, but introduced something alien to its evolved palate, something unexpected, a chemical compound it couldn't process, and its entire system faltered. It wasn't dying, but it was being poisoned, slowly and silently, by the very world it was trying to make its own. A strange, quiet sorrow settled over me. This creature, a testament to our colossal failure, a living, breathing landscape of our undoing, was not a monster. It was a victim, just as we were. It was created to exist in a world of our making, its every function tied to our refuse. And now, even that refuse, in its unpredictable toxic evolution, could harm it. The lines blurred completely then. The ground crawler, with its terrifying power and its slow ritualistic dance through the earth, was not a beast risen from the past. nor a terror of the future. It was merely a reflection, a distorted echo of our own existence. It was seeking meaning, creating beauty, in its own calcified way, and trying to survive in a world it did not choose. Its strength was its purpose, and its purpose was its most profound vulnerability. It was just a thing, born of our arrogance, forced to live in the hushed, broken silence of our monumental error, a geological sigh of a lost era. And I, Iris, the sleepy scientist, watched its tragic ballet, unable to intervene, only able to chronicle the quiet, desperate beauty of its passing. The air in this forgotten place tasted of cold steel and ancient dust, a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I moved through the hollowed-out skeleton of what was once a data vault, a fortress of information, now crumbling like everything else. Overhead, skeletal girders clawed at the perpetual twilight filtering through gaps in the collapsed roof, where concrete had surrendered to time and the elements. My footsteps, usually measured and quiet, seemed to echo too loudly here, each one a stark intrusion into the profound silence. This was Sector Gamma 7, a name whispered in hushed tones amongst the few remaining knowledge seekers. Thus, a forgotten server farm, they called it, buried beneath the forgotten districts, a place where the digital ghosts of a bygone era might still reside. It was a pilgrimage, a hopeful descent into the archives of our doom. I carried only my worn datapad, a few scavenged power cells, and the heavy weight of an enduring curiosity. The main power grid had been dead for decades, a monument to a global collapse. But pockets of auxiliary power, meticulously designed to weather the apocalypse, sometimes endured. My task was to coax life back into one of these forgotten nodes. I worked by the dim glow of my headlamp, its beam cutting through the motes of dust, dancing in the stale air. The silence was thick, pressing in, broken only by the rasp of my breathing and the gentle click of my tools. My hands, calloused and nimble from years of delicate work, moved with practiced ease across the rusted panels and tangled conduits. A faint hum, almost imperceptible at first, then growing into a low, resonant thrum, finally greeted my efforts. A small, circular indicator light on a dust-caked console flickered to life, bathing the immediate area in a sickly green glow. It was a tiny victory, yet it felt monumental. The machine still breathed, even if faintly. I began the slow, tedious process of sifting through the digital detritus of ages. Corrupted files, defunct operating systems, encryption barriers that refused to yield, they were all here, layers upon layers of digital decay. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the dwindling charge of my power cells and the increasing strain in my eyes. I navigated the labyrinthine directories, searching for a specific signature, a set of files I had long suspected existed, but never dared hope to find. Then, there it was. Not a grand public archive, but a discrete, encrypted partition labeled simply ER, Personal Logs. My breath hitched. Evelyn Reed. The name hung in the air, a ghost from my past. She had been a titan in the early days of the Genesis project, her brilliance matched only by her quiet intensity. And for a brief, fleeting period, she had been my mentor, guiding my nascent understanding of genetic engineering and biosculpting. I remembered her gentle patience, her unwavering belief in the potential for science to heal, to build anew, a belief I had once shared. Unlocking the partition took hours, a battle of wits against an encryption designed to outlast empires. When the access protocols finally yielded, a wave of relief, mixed with a profound sense of dread, washed over me. I had unearthed a treasure, but I suspected its contents would be a poisoned chalice. The first logs were dated decades before the collapse, brimming with a cautious optimism. Evelyn's voice, captured in a series of text entries, was precise, scientific, yet subtly infused with hope. They spoke of the initial goals of the Genesis project, a desperate, last-ditch effort to bioengineer resilient lifeforms capable of surviving the planet's accelerating degradation. Creatures designed not to conquer, but to endurance. Life that could thrive where humanity could not. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. The optimism began to curdle. Entries grew shorter, more terse. The scientific language gave way to a raw, emotional honesty. Log entry 347. The pressure is immense. Oversight committees demanding faster results. Resource allocation drying up. We're pushing parameters far beyond what's stable. The ethical line, once so clear, my heart ached as I read. I'd almost hear her voice, quiet and strained, whispering these words into the void. The agonizing compromises were laid bare, not as abstract concepts, but as Evelyn's personal torment. The project, born of a desperate dream, had quickly become a nightmare. The global crisis had escalated, food and clean water becoming precious myths. Humanity, facing extinction, demanded a miracle. And the scientists of Genesis were forced to deliver, no matter the cost. Log entry 412. We are being asked to reprioritize, to ensure maximum resilience and minimal resource dependency for the prototypes. They don't understand. This isn't a machine. The words were a hammer blow. This wasn't a flaw. It was a way deliberate alteration. Driven by desperation, by the relentless demands of a dying world, they had made choices that condemned the very creatures they sought to save. Evelyn's next entries were a descent into the inferno. She detailed the specific modifications, the enhancements that were forced upon them. The directive was to create creatures capable of entering a prolonged, deep biological stasis, a state of near hibernation that required minimal metabolic activity. This was their answer to resource scarcity, to a world that could no longer sustain vibrant, active life. Log entry 489. The stasis protocol, as they call it. We've managed to integrate a mechanism for extreme metabolic deceleration. They will require almost nothing. A biological dream. A slow, heavy breathing. My mind reeled, connecting her words to the creatures I now catalogued. The silent giants moving through the gray twilight. Their slowness, their inherent melancholy, their strange, almost mournful passivity. It wasn't just an adaptation. It was a design. A tragic consequence of the stasis protocol. They were not merely sleepy. They were perpetually extated, their very existence a prolonged, agonizing compromise. Log entry 501. The final override. They forced our hand. The awakening trigger for full metabolic activity is compromised. It's not a switch. It's a gradual. The words blurred before my eyes. Evelyn Reed, my gentle mentor, had been forced to condemn these creatures to a strange, often painful existence. Not a physical pain, perhaps, but a profound, existential suffering. They were trapped in a state of suspended animation, forever on the verge of waking, but never quite achieving it. Their sleepiness wasn't a natural state. It was a constant, enforced torpor. I felt a cold dread settle deep in my bones. It wasn't just a design flaw. It was a deliberate, horrifying choice made in the crucible of humanity's dying gasps. The creatures were indeed the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived, not because they defied natural evolution, but because they embodied the perverse evolution of human desperation. We had created life not to thrive, but to suffer in an eternal twilight slumber, forever carrying the burden of our species' greatest, most agonizing compromises. I closed the logs, the hum of the server farm a mournful drone in the silence. The weight of this knowledge was immense, crushing. It didn't just explain the creatures, it explained, you see. It explained the silent echoes, the forgotten world, and the slow, heavy breathing of my own sorrow. Sleep remained a luxury, a distant memory. Now, more than ever, I understood why. And the whispers of dust, the endless sigh of this forgotten world, seemed to carry Evelyn's silent plea, a whisper through the ages. God forgive us. God forgive me. Once she. The hum had always been there, a low resonant thrum beneath the city's skeletal ribs. It was the heart of this hollowed-out world, a testament to the colossal energies once harnessed, now merely leaking. For decades, it had been my constant companion, a lullaby of dying power. But lately, its pitch had changed. A tremor, almost imperceptible at first, now ran through its steady pulse, like a dying man's cough in the deep of the night. I felt it in the vibrations of the cold metallic floor beneath my worn boots, tasted it in the subtle shift of the recycled air. Something was failing. Not with a bang, not with a sudden catastrophic rupture, but with the insidious grace of entropy, the quiet surrender of steel and circuit to time. This was the true terror of our legacy, the slow, inexorable decay of the very systems that kept our peculiar world and its inhabitants alive. My laboratory, a cobbled-together haven in the belly of what was once a grand central station, hummed with its own chorus of low-power diagnostics. Flickering indicators on antiquated monitors, their green and amber lights casting long dancing shadows, detailed the escalating pathology. Environmental integrity, fluctuating. Air recirculation, intermittent. Power core delta, rising. The words were a familiar litany, but today they seemed to weigh heavier, each syllable a stone dropping into a silent well. I walked the perimeter of my observation deck, the vast, echoing space stretching out into the gloom. Below, in the cavernous expanse that had once been a concourse for millions, moved the silent inhabitants of my world. One, a magnificent creature I'd tentatively named Strum for the resonant murmur it made, shifted its weight. It was a marvel of bioengineering, built with the genetic blueprints of ancient Earth, but reimagined, augmented, adapted for this twilight existence. Its skin, like polished obsidian, shimmered even in the faint, recycled light. Strum was a herbivore, a gentle giant, its long neck designed to reach the genetically modified algae that grew in nutrient-rich reservoirs beneath the crumbling dome. I watched its delicate, almost weary movements. Strum's head, usually held high, was dipping lower. Its large, intelligent eyes, a luminous emerald against the dark, leathery hide, seemed to carry a new weight. It sensed it too, the shifting energy, the subtle diminishment of the life-giving currents that flowed through their engineered habitat. The air was growing cooler, the artificial light cycle shortening, the nutrient flow stuttering. The delicate balance maintained by ancient overburdened mechanisms was beginning to fray. A cold dread coiled in my gut. These creatures, these dinosaurs, born of our hubris and scientific folly, were innocent. They were the last beautiful ghosts of an age that had collapsed under its own weight, survivors of a world we had inadvertently broken. My work, my entire existence, was dedicated to understanding them, to cataloging their silent lives in the hope that perhaps, one day, someone might learn from our mistakes. But now they were threatened, not by predators or disease, but by the slow, indifferent death of the world around them. The choice, when it solidified in my mind, was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability. To stand by, to let fate take its course, would be to abandon the last vestiges of my purpose, to betray the silent trust these creatures had, unknowingly, placed in me. But to intervene, that was a risk. My own fragile existence, meticulously maintained on dwindling resources and a body that protested every movement, hung by a thread. The old infrastructure was a labyrinth of dead ends and treacherous paths, its control systems barely clinging to functionality. A single misstep, a wrong current, a crumbling walkway, and my own quiet vigil would end. I moved to my primary console, a relic salvaged from a forgotten data center, its screen cracked but still glowing with faint data streams. My fingers, gnarled and slow, danced across the grimy holographic interface, pulling up schematics of the habitat's life support. The central power regulator for Sector Gamma was failing. A series of ancient relays, deep within the city's forgotten conduits, were nearing critical decay. They controlled the nutrient pumps for Strum's feeding ground, the primary filtration for their water, even the subtle warmth that kept the algae flourishing. Sector Gamma, I murmured, the words raspy in the profound silence. It was miles from my current position, through abandoned service tunnels and across a precipitous bridge that spanned a vast flooded chasm. A journey I hadn't made in years. I considered the alternatives, however briefly. Could I reroute power from another sector? No, the system was too fragmented, too fragile. Could I guide Strum to another, more stable feeding ground? Even if one existed, the journey would be perilous for a creature of its size, and the energy expenditure for me to even attempt such a feat of herding was unimaginable. No, it had to be the relay. A direct, quiet intervention. A wave of exhaustion, heavy and cold, washed over me. Sleep, my namesake, had always been a distant memory, but now it felt like a siren song, tempting me to simply close my eyes and let the world unravel. But then, I saw Strum below, its massive form a beacon of life in the gloom, and the resolve, thin but unyielding, returned. I gathered my tools, a worn satchel filled with scavenged wires, ancient datapads, a jury-rigged power supply, and a faded schematic of the sector's forgotten bowels. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what I was about to attempt. This wasn't heroics, it was the quiet, desperate act of a dying world's caretaker. The journey was a slow, agonizing crawl through the city's forgotten veins. Dust, thick and ancient, swirled with every step, illuminated by the beam of my dim headlamp. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of stagnant water and decaying metal. The further I ventured from my lab, the more pronounced the hum of the failing system became, a low, guttural moan that seemed to resonate in my very bones. I navigated collapsed corridors, squeezed through narrow maintenance shafts, and clambered over mountains of debris that had once been sophisticated machinery. Each step was a gamble, the ground unstable, the ancient concrete cracking under my weight. My heart pounded a dull rhythm against my ribs, not from exertion, but from the constant, chilling awareness of the world's indifference. It cared nothing for my efforts, nothing for the lives I sought to protect. It merely continued its slow, graceful descent into oblivion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the access panel for the central power regulator, its rusted facade barely discernible in the darkness. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the faded symbols. The lock, a relic of a bygone era, groaned in protest as I forced it open. Inside, a chaotic nest of wires and sparking conduits lay exposed, pulsing with erratic currents. The air here was thick with ozone, the sharp smell of electrical failure. One specific set of relays, marked with a faded yellow tag, was the culprit. 3 of them, rusted beyond recognition, were fused open, causing the power fluctuations. Replacing them was out of the question. There were no replacements, not anymore. My only option was to bypass them, to reroute the power manually, a delicate dance of ancient wires and dwindling power. I connected my portable power supply, its dim blue light casting an eerie glow on the mess before me. With meticulous precision, I began stripping wires, bypassing the dead relays, soldering new connections with a handheld thermal torch. My hands, usually so steady in the quiet solitude of my lab, shook with a combination of exhaustion and the knowledge that one wrong spark could mean the end of everything. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken tension. The hum of the failing system was now a low growl, a hungry beast stirring in its sleep. I could almost hear my own ragged breath, shallow and quick in the oppressive silence. A bead of sweat traced a cold path down my temple, stinging my eye. I ignored it, focusing solely on the intricate web of wires, the subtle shift in current as I completed each connection. My fingers, numb with cold and concentration, worked on instinct. I could almost feel the power flowing, the struggling energy trying to find its path, a river seeking its course around a fallen dam. A small, almost imperceptible surge ran through the system. Then another. And then, with a soft, almost inaudible click, the growl of the failing system began to smooth. The erratic pulses steadied. The ozone smell lessened. I leaned back, my back aching, my muscles screaming in protest. The blue light of my power supply cast my face in stark relief, highlighting the lines of exhaustion, the smudges of grime. I had done it. For now. The central power regulator was stabilized. The nutrient pumps for Sector Gamma would hum back to life. The light cycle would hold for a little longer. But the victory was a whisper, a fleeting moment of respite in the face of an unending tide. The world remained indifferent. Its decay paused, but not halted. My intervention was a temporary bandage on a gaping wound, a deferral of the inevitable. As I slowly packed my tools, the new, steadier hum echoed through the chamber, a fragile lullaby of continued existence. I used my eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the dying city wash over me. The gentle, sad acknowledgement that my work, like the world itself, was an endless, quiet fight against the encroaching dark. Strum and the others would live to see another artificial dawn. And so, for now, would I. Listen closely. Can you hear it? That faint hum, the endless sigh of a world forgotten. Here, in the hollowed-out skeleton of what was once a grand city, the silence is thick, broken only by the whispers of dust and the slow, heavy breathing of things that shouldn't exist. My name is Aris. They call me the sleepy scientist, but sleep is a luxury I haven't known in decades. My work is to catalog the impossible, to chronicle the silent echoes of our greatest mistake. The creatures I study aren't beasts resurrected from ancient ice, nor are they fictions sprung from a child's wild imagination. They are ours, our strange, beautiful, horrifying legacy. The last living specters of an age we refuse to remember, moving through the gray twilight like ancient, slumbering giants. They are, in their own tragic way, the weirdest dinosaurs that ever lived. The flickering light of my datapad, a relic itself, pulsed a steady green. The immediate crisis, the brief, unsettling tremor that had rattled the old foundations of my makeshift lab, a forgotten subway station, repurposed, had subsided. It wasn't an earthquake, not in the geological sense. More like a deep sigh from the tortured earth, a shift in the tectonic plates of despair that underpin this entire ruined continent. My last generator, a wheezing behemoth salvaged from a forgotten hospital wing, had held. Its rhythmic thrum, usually a comforting pulse in the vast quiet, had faltered, caught in a sputtering cough, and then, blessedly, reasserted itself. I'd gripped the edge of my worktable, my breath held tight, until the tremor passed, leaving behind a familiar melancholic calm. The dust motes, briefly agitated, resettled in the air, dancing in the datapad's glow like tiny forgotten stars. It was these moments, these minor brushes with entropy, that forced me to reconsider everything. Why continue? Why endure the chilling solitude, the gnawing grief for a world irretrievably lost? My fingers, thin and calloused, traced the intricate biosignatures on the datapad's screen. Each line, each pattern, represented a life form utterly alien, yet utterly human in its genesis. My work, I knew, was more than science. It was an elegy, a whispered confession, a silent promise that their strange, fleeting existence would not go unremarked. Who else would remember them? Who else would bother to record the intricate patterns of the gloomstalkers, their chitinous shells shimmering with bioluminescent fungal growths, moving with a ponderous grace through the skeletal remains of what was once a grand cathedral? Or the whisper skins, whose epidermal layers adapted to mimic the texture and color of crumbling concrete or rusted rebar, making them almost impossible to distinguish from the environment until their long, segmented limbs would subtly unfurl, their faceted eyes. My journey through the ruins was a ritual, a penance. Each dawn, or what passed for it through the perpetual dust veil, I would emerge from the subterranean safety of my station, my breath misting in the cool, stale air. The landscape was a graveyard of ambition. Skyscrapers, once gleaming monuments to human ingenuity, now stood like broken teeth against the bruised sky, their glass eyes shattered, their concrete bones exposed. Freeway overpasses, twisted into impossible knots, sagged under the weight of time and neglect. Ghostly playgrounds, rusted swings swaying on imagined breezes, were havens for the smaller, more elusive creatures. I walked softly, my worn boots crunching on debris, my eyes constantly scanning, my senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air, the faint echoes of movement. One particular stretch, what I believed was once a sprawling park, was now wetland, choked with an aggressive metallic-sheened flora that pulsed with a faint internal light. It was here, amidst the shimmering reeds and stagnant pools, that I often observed the river serpents. Not true serpents, of course. Their forms were vaguely serpentine, yes, but their skin was an iridescent mosaic of scales that hummed with a low, resonant frequency, a byproduct of the altered minerals they ingested. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, their multiple vestigial limbs undulating beneath their bodies, leaving faint trails of glowing slime. They were beautiful in a terrifying, alien way, a testament to how far life, corrupted and reshaped, could stray from its original blueprint. And they were ours, born of our genetic tinkering, our pollution, our hubris. I recorded their behaviors, their feeding habits. They were surprisingly gentle, sifting nutrients from the sludge, their strange vocalizations, a series of clicks and whistles that seemed to mourn the very air they breathed. My camera, an antique that still functioned with remarkable clarity, captured their silent ballet. Each photograph, each data entry was a tiny piece of a mosaic I might never complete, a language I might never fully decipher. But the act of cataloging, of bearing witness, was enough. It lent purpose to the endless silence, a structure to my profound solitude. The ultimate fate of these weirdest dinosaurs was a question that haunted my every waking moment, and often my fitful dream. They were, in essence, a dying breed. Not in the rapid extinction level event sense, but in a slow, almost imperceptible fade. Their genetic instability, the very nature of their altered existence, meant that each successive generation was often weaker, more susceptible to environmental shifts, or simply less viable. I had observed species disappear from my records over the decades, their unique echoes fading into the background hum of the dying world. Others adapted, morphing into new, equally strange forms, continuing their tragic dance on the precipice of oblivion. They were not evolving towards a new golden age, not truly. They were merely persisting, a testament to life's stubborn will, even when that life was a grotesque parody of its former self. They were like ghosts, clinging to the ruined fabric of reality, destined to eventually dissipate into the dust from which they emerged, leaving no fossil record, no grand legacy, save for my whisper. My solitude was a heavy cloak, woven from the threads of loss and responsibility. There were no other voices, no other faces, save for the fleeting, wordless interactions with the creatures themselves. Sometimes, the weight of it all would press down, a physical ache in my chest, a yearning for another human touch, another shared laugh. But then I would look at the intricate patterns on a gloomstalker's shell, or the delicate, almost translucent wings of a sky manta as it glided through the upper currents, propelled by some unknown, altered biological principle, and the ache would transform. It became a quiet resolve. I was the last librarian in a burning library, not fighting the flames, but meticulously recording the last words of the condemned. This was my truth, my fragile, yet profound, purpose, to be the silent chronicler, to whisper the forgotten history of a lost world. My voice, hoarse from disuse, was now only for these creatures, for the rusted cities, for the ghost of humanity that still lingered in every broken window and every twisted girder. There would be no grand discovery, no cure, no rescue. Only the meticulous, mournful act of recording, day after day, year after year, until my own hum finally faltered, until my own light dimmed into the perpetual twilight. The wind, a dry, melancholic breath, sighed through the broken structures above. It carried the scent of dust, of decay, and something else, something wild and green, a testament to life's slow, insistent reclamation. I closed my datapad, the screen dimming to black. My work for the day was done. Another entry made, another echo caught. As I prepared to retreat into the earth's embrace, I listened again to the endless hum, the heavy breathing of things that shouldn't exist. It was a lullaby now, a mournful song of acceptance. My sleep would be brief, as always, but perhaps, just perhaps, a little less restless tonight. For I was Eris, the sleepy scientist, and I was listening. I was remembering. And in this desolate, forgotten world, that was enough. It had to be.